I'll just go back to the stick.
Caseman here in my name is Ross Scott, Florida Fish and Wildlife, based out of Naples. The last 4.5 years I've been working with Red Cockaded Woodpeckers exclusively within Big Cypress National Preserve. FWC started this project cooperatively with the National Park Service in the end of 2007, and we're still continuing it to this day. Some of you weren't here in 2011 for this symposium. I looked back this week at my last year's presentation, and when I presented, we only documented 35 RCW trees that were dead from this Jarhead Fire. And so this is kind of an update on what we found through 2012 and going into the future. So a little bit of background here. I'm not going to talk about RCW breeding, foraging, habitat types. I will say that they live in old growth slash pine trees here in Big Cypress, longleaf pine trees elsewhere through their range. They use the live trees and resin as a natural defense to keep snakes and other critters out of the cavities. Forever and ever, long time ago before we were here, trees were dying in South Florida, either from hurricanes, lightning, pine beetles, fires, and unknown stress. We do see in other places some trees lost from root compaction, swamp buggies, large equipment moving too close to the tree many times with a lot of repetitive motion. So slash pine mortality is nothing new. It happens all the time. It's just a matter of what can we do to kind of decrease some of those values when we have a chance. And so taking into account all of the factors going in here, it was kind of nice in a way that we could focus on the Jarhead Fire in 2011. A little bit about the Jarhead history. 2011, I believe it was late April, early May. You can see the perimeter on the left, the daily progression I got from Mindy at Big Cypress. And an overall view of the fire in relation to our RCW clusters in 2011. The green dots are active RCW clusters. I hope they show up. The yellow dots are inactive RCW clusters. So you can tell that effectively the central part of our population was somehow affected by this fire. So after the smoke cleared, everything was basically shut down from Oasis West to Turner River Road for our purposes. We were in the middle of banding season. We were climbing trees, banding nestlings, doing pledge checks. But after the fire went through, we decided to shift our focus over to figuring out what we may need to do. How bad was it really? So we took our cameras out and inspected each cavity tree that we deemed active or suitable prior to that fire. We didn't go after the trees that we didn't think were unsuitable for RCW use. Those were on our list, but they weren't as important immediately. While we were doing that, we inspected all the trees for signs of new fire scars, any sort of stress or indicators that the tree might not make it through that immediate post-fire weather and conditions. Once we did that, we moved ahead and started installing artificial cavities, whether it be artificial cavity inserts or drilled cavities, with the eventual goal of getting each of those RCW clusters you saw on the map 4 suitable cavities. 1 cavity for each adult, and hopefully they have enough food and success to raise fledges that year. And then we continued looking at all of the trees into the fall into the next spring, doing a complete cavity census. This is as of August 2012, there was 313 known RCW trees within that perimeter. And from immediately after the Jarhead Fire, we found 82 RCW trees dead. Almost all of those are attributable to the Jarhead Fire in some instance. I did not include trees that we found were dead from lightning strikes or really unknown reasons. One cluster went completely inactive. We lost birds in a cluster. It's not good, definitely to lose a whole breeding pair of RCWs due to a fire, but with those artificial cavities, we were able to go back in there and supply cavities and actually see some indications that birds are using the area again. And we actually discovered 2 new clusters in areas that we couldn't get to, or it was too thick, or we never thought that there were birds there. So 82 out of 313, that's over a quarter of the trees. Known RCW trees in that burn footprint. It's quite a chunk of trees. But in 2012, I believe we hit a new record for breeding success in big cypress of 83% of the RCW nests were successful this year. That's a new record. So the fire did take out some trees, but by improving that habitat, there was a lot more foraging potential and showing up in our breeding success. Just rough numbers and averages. The trees measured inside the Jarhead perimeter. I broke down the trees that died and the trees that are still alive, hopefully. Really not that much difference of, looking at these measurements. It's a lot of the trees were obviously stressed. If you remember how dry it was that year, it was, it's by 9 in the morning you could smell some of those volatiles coming out of the pine needles. It was ridiculous how dry it was. The tree DBH was relatively the same. The tree heights, on average, the Jarhead trees were a bit shorter, but the cavity height was taller. So a lot of the trees were the skinnier, shorter trees that had high cavities in it. Percent canopy loss, obviously, it should be 100% on the Jarhead dead, because dead trees going to lose its needles. But the scorch height was interesting, 13 feet on average, out of 82 trees. So there were some trees out there that had, almost 30-foot fire scorch on the trunk. And we did start taking measurements on the lowest limb, trying to see if there was any correlation with any sort of ladder fields. And so a lot of those, so looking at this, on the averages again between live and dead, not a huge difference on between those two categories. Percent canopy loss on the trees that lived was 35% on our estimation. That's where we're thinking, well, there's a dead branch here, there should be needles. How much of that canopy, when you look at it, is actually lost from this fire? And so here's some examples. These are not the worst case, they're not the best case. These are what I thought were really indicative of the situation. These were 2 active RCW trees that died. You can tell they didn't burn down. There wasn't a crown fire by any means, but the photo on the left has quite a fire scorch, and you can see the RCW cavity about halfway up, light orange color. On the right, you can see where a little bit of late mortality is taking place. There's still a few needles on that canopy, and that was taken in March of this year. So it's been almost a whole year, and it's still, there's still trees showing some signs of stress out there. And you can also see in the background of the left photo, it's not just the RCW trees that had mortality. There's quite a few in the background that suffers some sort of stress. And so, like I said, this is just indicative of what we saw. 2 more examples. One on the left is worst case scenario. There's scorch going 40 feet up. There's a cavity in there, in the scorch. The sap caught fire and the cavity burned out on the inside. The tree's dead. This was almost, if I remember correctly, 6 or 7 days after that burn. And you can see that most of those trees still have needles in there, but most of them don't now. And then on the right, there's an example of another one of those trees. We went in about 3 weeks after the fire came through there. The tree still has needles. We're using our cameras to inspect it. The fire scorch was low on that tree. You can tell it's only 4 or 5 feet. Still has needles, but the tree's dead. It has needles now. It's dead. We just didn't know it at the time. And so, by looking at a lot of these trees, knowing how dry it was, fire crews and our crews, we do best we can to clear debris away from the base of these trees. It was so dry that a lot of times what we saw was there was roots burned out underneath the tree before it actually fell over. A lot of times the tree's still standing, and there's really not much holding on except the stem. The roots have all burned down into the ground. And so that is going to be something we need to watch out for next time. You know, a lot of these trees that survive are stressed and they do have some damage, but the least we can do is continue to keep clearing these trees. The other story in the left photo was predominantly palmetto. It was pretty thick. The right photo is one of the mosaic marshes where there's pine trees surrounding little ponds of sawgrass. So we went through and did cavity augmentation. Left photo is me putting an insert in PICU, and then right photo is putting in drilled cavities. We installed 24 inserts in Big Cypress immediately after the fire. Only 2 of those died. There was a big discussion last year of would we be adding additional stress to trees that have just been through a fire. And 2 dying is really good. Like we were surprised just to see that out of 24 installed, because a lot of the situations we were putting these cavities in were not ideal. You know, fire had come through, it hadn't reflushed and gotten new green needles up or anything, so that tree was under quite a bit of stress. And then here I am taking out a chunk of wood about a foot long out of the tree. So that didn't help. Drilled cavities, we did some in this spring, put 19 in. We haven't had any die yet. Knock on wood, whatever. When we do our next census, hopefully they're still alive. And so yeah, we lost some trees, but a lot of places this was the first true growing season burn that we saw. And you can tell both photos that it really thinned out a lot of the trees. And this is what we look for in the RCW. A partially herbaceous understory. You can see in the bottom photo there's some flowering grasses and palmetto and a mix of grass with some old growth pine trees. That's fantastic. Yeah, we lost some trees, but overall the habitat throughout this fire has improved. It's something that I like to see. Burning is part of the ecology of these birds, but at the same time, factoring 82 cavities lost, but then seeing the potential for more now, it's really good to see when you go back and look at these. So before I close, I do want to say thank you to everyone who's helped us with this. It's been pretty trying, after a fire in the summer, the mosquitoes breaking down, that kind of stuff. So everyone, my office, FWC, the folks out here at Big Cypress putting up with us, basically trying to get into the fire so we can look at this. Resource staff, folks at Florida Forest Service have gone and volunteered helping us, USGS staff, Jim and UF with Adam, working, trying to figure out what to do next. And if I missed anybody, I'm sorry, but thank you. And I'll take any questions if you have any.